Everybody called me the captain, even though I was a major. They huddled around me as I stepped down from the airship onto the slippery roof of the Edgware Army Depot. I struggled to wave goodbye to my travelling companion in the door behind me, wishing him good luck in Africa. At the time, I thought he was the luckier of us. Most officers had been granted places on colonial ventures, and here was I, receiving my ceremonial demotion at the hands of a mass of pasty sods, the driving snow settling on our shoulders like we were already dead. We were the experiment, or for pessimists, a long shot at insurance. You see, as I have somehow failed to mention so far, the end of the world was upon us. So they said, yet even I didn't believe it, no matter the 10 feet of snow at the break of summer, no matter the guards on the depot wall shooting the starving wretches outside, no matter the ash, the foul-tasting ash that soured the taste of snow on quivering tongues. Something about an explosion across the pond, one that took out the western United States with merciful speed. The newspapers said we'd have at least a year of volcanic winter. The last headlines that got printed said 5 years. The general who had briefed me 2 days ago said, in the quietest of his words, that I shouldn't think about when we'd get to go home. It was early June, and in the balmy midday sun, London was -10°C, the streets clogged with the dead and the countryside with the dying. A couple more nights would finish the job. From that day on, though, all that was no business of mine, nor the hundreds gathered at Edgware and thousands at other depots. We were the chosen ones, mostly military families. While the cream of London was heading down to my old stomping ground in Ghana, we were going north to link up with some kind of research base in Greenland. There were dozens of these bases, established over the last few months by government stargazers. They were meant to tell us what the hell was going on with this planet, but I believe that information was kept highly confidential, with the deepness of that general stare being my only window into the horrid truth. They were built to withstand extreme cold, apparently, so Whitehall threw these unlikely havens onto the evacuation rolls. After my arrival at Edgware, things moved quickly. Within the hour I, as captain, had my ship, the land dreadnought Atrabates, or Atrabates as the crew called it. Combine a steam train with a building, and you get a land dreadnought. A handful of these were built over the previous 2 years for use on the steppe, gearing up for another adventure up through the Crimea. Came in handy now when you needed to transport the living through the seas of dead outside the walls. Some of them came in through the gates as they opened, but the automaton sentries swept them back out without hesitation. Pistons chugged, tracks rattled, and our journey, or exodus, began. Outside of the city, the snow was piled even higher, so we had no trouble forging our own route across the blinding plains, flattening protruding treetops and staying away from the windows when crowds of refugees tried to run alongside us. No one could stay away from those damn portholes for long, though. Everyone expected to see someone somewhere who was weathering the storm. They stopped looking after maybe 10 days, when we were making the nerve-wracking transition from land to ice sheet off the west side of Scotland. Couldn't believe my eyes when I saw refugees walking out over the Atlantic. Not just a few either. Seems quite a few people decided to follow the example of the sea dreadnought Babbage, which went out a month before us to set up the first haven. Vehicles of all kinds were strewn across the beautiful canvas around us, with the wind sweeping snow off the remains for us all to see. One of the piston valves cracked in the Dreadnought's Goliath engine, and we had to rumble on at half speed for the last 2 weeks. Meant that guys with sleds could keep up with us, which meant I was out on the decks with Ollie and Chalk, the 2 guys on the crew who had been with me when things got messy at my last job in Kumasi. Crack shots, those 2. Saved us a whole lot of trouble while the Dreadnought still rolled. Stopped rolling just a day from our destination when the front end dipped into a soft snowdrift and the back end lifted an inch off the ground. Had another 10 miles to go according to the map, So I ordered everything piled onto the sledges for a bit of a hike. It was going to be a 1-day ride on our compression engine sleds, turned into a 4-day mess of trudging, climbing and squinting at a directionless haze of a world. Didn't order the group to split up, but we did. People just kind of stopped caring if there was still someone following behind them. By the time me and the boys at the front caught wind, we were beyond caring too. Didn't bring enough food, since we planned to make return trips to the Dreadnought once we checked in with the chaps at the research station. Nice plan, huh? Me and Ollie were the first to lay eyes on it. Our new home, our new London, as we had all agreed to call it back in the steamy warmth of the Dreadnought. Walls of razored ice, collapsed buildings, bodies, -20 if you kept out of the wind. It was quite the welcome party. Only thing that looked good was the heat tower. It was actually a steam compressor, as I had been excitedly told many times by crew members. What did it do? Well, it was a tower that made heat. Clearly it worked, and had been working recently, for there must have been some 20 meters or more of rapid glaciation in the area around it, locking trees and even animals in place for their long slumber. The tower had carved an ice-free crater into this hellscape, into which we descended via a steel counterweight lift that snaked up the steep edge. There were 80 of us in the leading group. Had been 250 on the Dreadnought, maybe 50 were still there at that moment waiting for us to return. Didn't plan to return anymore. People were digging around the ruins of the old station with a stalled astonishment, like the joke would be through any minute, so why get worried now? A scene like that splits people into those who accept the situation and those that won't. Me, Ollie, Chalk, handful of others. We had pistols under our jackets. We could live through only as much of this dire end as we wanted. Made getting out there to collect up the ruins of the base much easier. So then, this is how we got our start. It was a sarcastically sunny morning, day 1 in New London. 70% of the crew missing, no fuel for the tower, no shelter, and only frigid sticks of uncooked meat in the base's roughly freestanding larder. No sense thinking about what meat it actually was, but at the time I somehow didn't expect the worst. I had Martin, the steam wrangler from the Dreadnought, take a look over the tower. At its base was a coal-fired generator, currently burned out. Ordered some of the crew to go dig new coal from the supply mounds nearby, while Six Eyes Martin explained how this monolithic thing was the new Jesus. He wore goggles over glasses, in case you were wondering. Anyway, he said it put steam into the pipes that ran around its base, and we could direct it to power engines and heat radiators. It'd be just like the Dreadnought, basically, but with any luck the coal would be more plentiful out here than in there. With a welcome fleck of hope warming our spirits, we got to work. My job was to be the captain, shorthand for judge, jury and executioner, not to mention legislator. This teary crater was my kingdom now, until the generals came over to say otherwise. Fancy stuff, but all it meant was that it was my fault if we all died, so I had to summon the courage to keep my voice loud and my pistol holstered. I had help from a rule book given to all captains, even those slated for the high life in a mild colony. You work 8 till 6 and try to stay alive in between. Well, by 5 that day, the rule book was kindling the coals in the generator. The tower began to stream smoke into the darkening sky, and, sure enough, the pipes lining the ground around it started to hiss, thaw, and soon radiate. It was a warm place to rest for the night, but no point waking up dead. We needed a city, and we needed it then and there. Asked for 10 volunteers to work all night clearing out the ruins for materials. Got 7, and picked out 3 more. Everyone else huddled around the tower, and around me specifically, just as they had in Edgware. They had been told in good faith that I was the man for this job, all because I had experience running a colony. Only Ollie and Chalk had been there to see exactly what I achieved there, and why I didn't stay. So, I can't say I knew exactly what to do, and when doing anything means stepping away from the steam pipes, Well, you must understand if you're alive to read this. As I stood there, a lady shuffled over to talk to me. It was Dr. Ainsworth, who by the virtue of her first name being Priscilla, went by Painsworth. People had said she was in fact just a nurse, but I had seen her medical license among the documents on the Dreadnought. Not many women doctors in army circles, suffice to say, so you know how the enlisted can be. "All these runny noses are going to have us in trouble," she told me. "We'll be too weak to work tomorrow, and then a common cold will be the death of all of us. This talk of houses can be banished right here and now. Get your wrenchman to put together a steam oven and throw a roof over it. And, if you'll permit it, I need 10 stout fellows and a couple of orderlies. We'll need a field hospital before dawn, I guarantee you." I've no idea how many lives this advice saved. It meant working all night for most, and it meant Ollie brandishing a rifle on the heat tower's scaffolding. But it meant we had roofs by midnight, and sick beds ready for when 2 children were found with a fever. Oh yes, I forgot to mention it, we had 15 children with us, who served no purpose other than to remind us to keep civilization going. Going we kept, into the small hours of the night. Six Eyes was put in charge of renovating the central lab to use as a headquarters, while I volunteered 10 more work hands to collect coal for the tower. The last man I tapped on the shoulder looked at me with empty eyes as he turned away from the tower and took the pick I offered him. He was an older fellow, older than me anyway, and didn't say a word between Edgware and New London. I mention him because he was found on the far side of the coal pile a few hours later, face down in the snow beside a half-full collection bucket. Painsworth called it heart failure and said we should let people rest. Told her no. Told her this was to be the longest day of our lives or the last. 2 more folks interrupted us, having lost sensation in their feet from the cold, and the doc departed without further complaint. While no one seemed to know the deceased man well, he was apparently a veteran of assorted troubles in India and wore 3 medals beneath his coat. There was a clamour to have him buried in a manner befitting his service, a clamour subdued by the shared desire to keep talk of death from the children. Facing death themselves, everyone wanted to see this man's remains treated with dignity. But I knew that any veteran of India must have known that tending to the dead in a crisis wasn't always a free choice to make. So, I calmly told the gathering that we would hide the body in the snow. Then I told them that we would now be working 14 hours a day, starting tomorrow. Some seemed willing to complain, but I left them before any spoke up. I knew what my job was. I knew that anger, resentment and hate were all part of my role. In fact, if I wasn't hated, then I would have failed, because the only way that could come about was if everyone was allowed the sweet release. Such were my thoughts and the general mood as dawn broke after our first day in New London, back when everything was still going okay.